Ready to challenge what you think? Every week on Rise Radio Podcast, we ignite powerful dialogue about belief, social narratives, prophecies, and spirituality. Grounded in biblical apologetics with expert guests, bold questions, and unexpected insights. We aim to contextualize our culture and bring clarity. This isn't about small talk. It's big questions answered. Rise Radio Podcast. Let the truth rise.
Well, hello folks, and welcome to today's episode of the Rise Radio Podcast. And I'm going to start this episode off with a verse from a hymn that is really powerful. And I just hope it encourages you as it's encouraged me, especially in these times when there's so much going on. So it says, "He gives us more grace when the burdens grow greater. He sends us more strength when the labours increase. To added affliction, he addeth his mercy. To multiplied trials, his multiplied peace." And I just, it's just so encouraging to remember, as I've been recently, that even if these things are difficult in life, even if the times get harder, that he is faithful to us and it's his strength that keeps us going. So on that note, I have Cameron from Scotland on the line. He has been on the podcast before where he gave his testimony, where he talked about going through the truth movement, through the times of the pandemic in 2020, and then he came to faith in Jesus Christ. Cameron, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Dave. Good to be here.
Yeah, so we want to talk about a few interesting topics today in terms of the things that are going on in the world. I mean, definitely a lot going on, right, Cameron? It's just seems to be speeding up.
Yeah, it really does. And it feels like a pressure cooker, doesn't it? The agendas are moving forward. Society feels unrested. And the world just feels really backward at the moment. And it feels unsettled, for sure, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, is there anything in particular you've noticed recently? I know before we started this interview, we were talking off air about how it seems like right now, you've had the years of the woke, you've had the left, the far left stuff, but really being promoted in society. But now it's almost like we're seeing a swing of the pendulum and almost like co-opting the right in a way to make them more hardline and perhaps extreme.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. And, I think it's definitely right to see that a lot of the woke stuff is crazy and is something that we want to question and speak truth into. And obviously that biblical truth. But I guess what I'm seeing more of is more airing of views that are conservative views in an attempt to kind of speak truth into that, but there are more tearing people over to the other side. So it's that whole left-right kind of dichotomy going on, but I feel like it's leading people in the wrong direction and further away from just the truth of the Bible.
Do you think that there's an element where the people are being somewhat militarized and pushed towards physical conflict in this?
Yeah, I really do. I think society in general is becoming more unsettled. People are noticing various issues even more. And I've used the term before that, it feels like a bit of a pressure cooker at the moment. And I'm seeing more people having that kind of visceral reaction to things that are on the news, things that are being reported. And I think people are really just looking for, they see something's wrong and they want something done about it. And I don't think they see anything being done about it. And I feel a lot of people want to take these matters into their own hands by their own power. That's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, and that's not to say that there isn't an issue that's been there, right? So it's not that the issue itself is made up, which probably makes it all the more effective, but that maybe what they're doing is polarizing people where there's no longer nuance involved, and it's kind of like you're either far that side or pushed far to the other side.
Yeah, no, I'm seeing much more of that as well. And, like you said, there's definitely issues there. There would have to be for things to become so polarized, but those issues can be used in a way that can really set people against each other, kind of raise their aggression levels, and then make people even kind of further apart in that way, and having kind of just rational thinking as well. So I'm definitely seeing much more of that. There is, like I said, there is definitely an issue there. It's almost like a kind of catch-22, where you see the issue and you can't ignore it, but then you want to do something about it, and you just don't know to what level. So it can be a difficult situation for people to be in.
Yeah, because I once heard it said that the problem is with like cults and with like unhealthy dichotomies is that, they can take a truth, but then turn it into the truth. And so then you lose that nuance that, yes, there's some truth in that, but then it becomes everything is about that and there's no nuance, and you actually lose the balance in the process, right? Because, like, for example, when Jesus is described as being full of grace and truth, it's like it's not one without the other. And the problem is when you go hardline only into truth and you lose love and grace, it becomes severe.
Yes, and I think that's such a good point on Jesus coming with grace and truth and that balance, right? Because I guess we've had that, to go back to the whole woke kind of analogy, that whole woke thing about let's everyone be loving, be tolerant, but totally dismissing the truth. And now we're swinging over to, right, whatever's the truth, regardless of your feelings, and not that balanced view that Jesus had there. And I think, what I see and hear a lot of is that a lot of people think there's not a lot being done about the issues that we're kind of talking about, and seeing weakness, and they want strength, and they want to be strong, and they see it as they need to take that mantle up themselves and be strong. That can mean any number of things, right? It can mean like being aggressive or potentially even using force as well. So it's that push from one side to the other, but we shouldn't be blown about by every doctrine to either side. We should be following the Bible, stick to the truth, and that's such a good example you gave of Jesus there.
You can still follow the good doctrine and promote the good doctrine and still be loving and merciful and gracious at the same time. It's not to the exclusion of each other, is it? So, yeah, it just seems to be really swinging that way, the pendulum at the moment. And I was going to read this quickly. This is something that's happened recently, which is of note, that Tucker Carlson, the guy who used to be on Fox News, I know he's been kind of going more into the realm of the alt-right, would you say, in the last few maybe months or year, and also involved with the Charlie Kirk memorial service. But just recently, he actually did an interview with Nick Fuentes, who is considered to be quite hard right. And this headline just recently said, one of the most dangerous interviews ever in MAGA media, why Tucker Carlson platformed white Sue, I'm going to be careful about what the words I say on here, Nick Fuentes. And so, and I think the quote was, in the interview, Fuentes criticized the power of organized JEWRY in America. So what do you make of this? Because Tucker Carlson seems to have started off seemingly a bit more moderate in the alt-right media, and then he started to blatantly turn into labeling Israel quite regularly, having guests on that are really anti that nation, and then now just recently actually platforming Nick Fuentes.
Yeah, I mean, cynically, it's not a massive surprise, to be honest with you. And I think a lot like Tucker Carlson both started from a moderate position and then end up where they were always wanting to go, to be quite honest. And the nation we're talking about is an excellent vehicle to basically bring people over to that kind of far right side and to get trapped again in that that dichotomy. I'm not really surprised we're seeing that with Tucker Carlson. We're seeing that with Candace Owens. And this is the thing that we've heard these people, and they have said some truths and some things that really do make sense and are really good and true. But then the more they've gone on, all of a sudden they take a massive veer off to the right. And then people follow that. That's the thing, because they've been so influential and they have said things that do make sense, that then as soon as they twist off to the right, even though you feel that, a lot of people just follow along with it. And I think it's a gradual thing. You know, if he'd come out and started saying that straight off the bat, would he be where he is right now? I don't think so. But because he's done that gradually, you can see that people are basically just tolerated that a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And then all of a sudden find themselves in a place where they maybe never originally intended to be. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's almost like a case of match and lead, where, you know, someone matches you where you're at, but then leads you in a predetermined direction. Mm-hmm. You know, they just gradually introduce breadcrumbs in the direction they want the person to go. Yeah,
no, 100%. You know, a lot of people can get red flags with that stuff as well. You can get little things, but it's that whole thing of like, well, you know, they have spoken a lot of sense before, so actually maybe they're right on this, and then all of a sudden you're, like I said, it's that gradual shift, that drifting along, and I do think it is kind of designed to be that way, to be quite honest with you, to pull people off to that side. And it's very clever, you know, because someone like Tucker Carlson, you know, even if people disagreed with him, he can be quite a nice person, quite charming, all those kind of things as well, kind of very suited to television, but where he's ended up is just in such a wild, wild place. And like I said, I don't believe that is accidental at all. And the same with Candace Owens as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually she's recently become more vocal about her conversion to Romanism, which we will touch on as well, because I think that is part of this. But on that subject, I mean, with Tucker Carlson and the way this is going, I see also recently that David Icke, which is this is where it gets even more sort of weird. His program, his online show, is called Iconic, and they tweeted, Tucker Carlson admits non-human force is controlling society. It's almost like someone has been trying to tell us this for decades. That's a reference to David Icke. Then it says, at Tucker Carlson, when will you be interviewing at David Icke on this topic?
Well, yeah, I think this is, it's crazy, isn't it? We even talked about David Icke in my first, the testimony I gave on your channel. And you know how I was listening to him as well, but you dig into him and you realise, you know, he's not all that he seems to be, but it's extremely interesting they've ended up saying the same things. And again, I don't think that's by accident at all. And I think this also feeds into the whole thing that, I guess, before I was a Christian, when we were in the truther movement, I felt like it was a minority movement. And I think this is really, you think about how mainstream Tucker Carlson is, and then how kind of niche David Icke is, only really known in the truther movement. And now those worlds are almost connecting, and I wouldn't be surprised if he did interview him and those things start to really get connected. In a way, it's ridiculous and it is a bit shocking, but it really isn't that surprising. And you know where that ends up leading as well, is in that will then validate the things that David Icke has been talking about. Just like he said in his quote, it's almost like I've been telling you this stuff all along. And then where do we end up with people who maybe don't know David Icke are then jumping onto that and be like, oh wow, this is David Icke. This guy seems to be speaking a lot of truth. And then boom, you're full on into Theosophy, into Luciferian doctrine. And that's the intention, isn't it? Is to switch people over. That whole kind of Gnostic movement of secret knowledge, but that's becoming more and more widespread at the moment. So yeah, that's a crazy thing, but not altogether unsurprising.
Yeah, I mean, so I just want to point out in this conversation, because I know that some people can get triggered when you mention these topics, right? So I just want to make it clear before we carry on that when when you talk about these things and some of the maybe false light Luciferian agendas and where they usually end up, there's obviously problems in that nation. And it's not to say that the government is all, there's obviously mixed intentions within every government in the world. So it's not to like say that is without any problems.
No, and we do have to be careful with that as well. Again, that goes back to just being biblical and being balanced, right? I mean, ultimately, we know this world is not perfect. We know this world is getting worse. We know it is gonna get worse, and we know that those without Jesus are, we're not perfect. Anyone who's a Christian isn't perfect. Even more so, those who are not saved by grace alone, by faith alone, in Christ alone. And that goes for any nation as well. And I do think, you got to kind of realize that when you look at that nation and say, right, they've got these things going on that you could criticize, and it's fair to criticize anyone, any nation. But we see that in our own countries. We see that all over the world. So it's not a kind of special thing. But it is good to be aware of that as well. And realize ultimately that just points us to that they need Christ. Everybody needs Christ is ultimately it. But it's not a special nation that is without Christ. I wouldn't say there's any Christian countries, really. There might be a facade, all those kind of things. But everyone needs Christ. And that goes for every nation.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, because I think sometimes because of the damage that's been done by certain leaders like John Hagee, where they have this dual covenant theology, and they basically say that the group of people in the nation we're talking about in Israel is, that they don't need Jesus to be saved. This kind of false heretical doctrine that they can be saved purely by their genetics or the people group. So that's obviously patently false, and that's not what any of us would agree with.
Yeah, no, 100%. And interestingly, I believe in a future millennium. I believe that the Lord still has a plan for Israel in the end times. I believe that's 100% biblical, for sure. And it's interesting, people who don't believe that, as soon as you start saying something like that, John Hackey's always the name they bring up as well.
Yeah.
But there's no real association with it. You know what I mean? I would agree that John Hagee teaches heresy just like they do. But it's interesting that people link that together as well.
Yeah. So it's, again, neither extreme. So we do believe that Israel is there for a reason, and that's part of the plan. And again, that doesn't mean to say there haven't been elitist powers, because that's the world we live in, who have made certain things happen, as with any nation in the world. But ultimately we know that God is sovereign, and that God works in this world to fulfill his greater purposes. So that's really the focus we have here.
That's part of the thing with the truther movement, as I talked about in my testimony when I was there, that the whole thing was about telling some truth about the world and about the way things work with agendas and elites, all that kind of stuff. But that the solution there was a mystic solution, that kind of Gnostic worldview. And we're always told that when I was in the truth movement, that we are sovereign beings as well. And I think that, I think we noted before about the Carlson's connection to Roman Catholicism and also Candace Owens as well. And they've got a lot of mystical beliefs in there as well. And we've got to be aware that, the Catholic system is a changing system, is a changing beast over time. But I think ultimately that is to bring in that false light that people are looking for. People are looking for light, 100%. But where that's going to lead them to is a false light that is not the truth, that is not Jesus, and to a whole other solution that is not biblical. Even if it references the Bible, even if they get biblical verses to try and support where they're going, it's not Christ.
Yeah, because there is this idea in the general Luciferian doctrine that, getting rid of the old religions and bringing in their new false enlightenment, which sometimes I've seen, like certainly with Aleister Crowley, I've seen talk about, getting rid of Christians or basically any religion connected to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I mean, in the sense that, any religion like Abrahamic type religion must be gotten away with, because I mean they see the God of Israel as the demiurge, don't they? It's completely upside down.
Yeah, no, it's completely inverted. And I think that, one of the things that we know is kind of pushed forward in the speeding of the agenda is that, there are, when you really look at all the religions, there's really a kind of hidden Christ in there somewhere in each of these religions. And really, there's really multiple Christs. And, we're looking for a coming Christ, but who's that coming Christ going to be? And as we know, that's the Maitreya, the false Christ, the Antichrist. And, that's all completely false. There's only one Christ. That is Jesus Christ. He is the truth, the way, and the life. And none can go to the Father except through him. The Bible verse doesn't say except through him or the other Christ and all these other religions. So that's the thing, it feeds into that whole kind of agenda then of mysticism. We're even seeing that coming into churches and stuff as well. And there's a whole bunch of mysticism all around and occult stuff all around the world, in the UK and the West. It's infiltrated to a massive degree, and all of that is feeding into that agenda.
Yeah, I was going to say with the New Apostolic Reformation as well, don't you see that mysticism and the ecumenicism as a whole, just drawing people into this kind of false form of Christianity? Yeah,
and I heard it recently said by a Christian who's passed away now, but, listen to a lot of his material, Dave Hunt. He's talking about a verse that is relevant here, which is having a form of godliness but denying the power thereof. And it can, this kind of stuff can seem like Christianity, and it can have a lot of Christianese type language and all the kind of lingo around it. But it's a form of godliness but denying the power. What is the power? The power of God is the gospel unto salvation. And that's what Paul says, right? That's what it is. It's people who want to have some form of Christianity, some shell of it, but denies the power of the gospel. And that's what it is. It's just a veneer of Christianity. It's not true Christianity. And we've got to be very careful with it. We've got to be very careful with it.
Yeah, because I saw a video recently from, I believe it was a Christian lady in Germany. And before I say this, I want to make it clear that we're not saying any individual is knowingly associating with the leader of Germany in the 1940s. Because I've got to be careful about that. Don't want to falsely accuse any individual. But this similar type of thing happened in Germany in those years. And she talks about how when the leader of Germany at that time, he set up a church called the Reichskirche, which was like a government-approved false version of Christianity that basically brought the churches under the state religion and basically preached a version of Christianity that was approved by the regime. And then, of course, with that leader, that dictator at the time, he also had some mystical views as well, didn't he? Like very similar to theosophical stuff. So there's an interesting parallel there.
Yeah, for sure. And, you see there's some parallels as well where, and, I've not delved too much into this, so I'm, got to be careful what I say, but, some of the things that are reported are that, that particular dictator was against transgenderism, was against pornography. So it's those, conservative seeming values. And, we wouldn't disagree with that necessarily. That's, we need to speak truth about those things as well. But it's that whole switch then of what are you really using that for? We've got to bear in mind the Genesis 3, serpent was the most subtle creature. And, was subtly twisted God's word to such a devastating effect. And even, when you look at that dictator as well, and I've read the most famous book, and I read that in side to side with Madame Blavatsky's books, you can see a lot of links, a lot of bits that feed off each other. And there's lots of different quotes and stuff. That's a whole kind of rabbit hole to go down, really. But, I took the time out to actually read that most famous kind of book that is banned in some places, side by side with Blavatsky. And there really is a lot of linkages in there. And, it's very clear. So again, like you said, that false church, and it can be said to be verbally of God by that dictator and by whoever was listening to him, but very clearly it was absolutely not.
Yeah, because you can see some parallels to what we were just saying a bit ago as well with, kind of like removing anyone associated with the old religion or the, quote, demiurge in that theosophical Gnostic view, just kind of like trying to remove anyone out of the way to bring in this new world, which is kind of like a pagan, mystic, false Christian dominionism. It just seems all very much what the Bible warns about.
Yeah, it definitely does. And to your point on removing the two problems, as they would see it, is true Christians and also Jews as well. There's an old quote from an old Omega magazine, which is a New Age kind of magazine, which says there's only one obstacle to unity, and they're talking about world unity, and that is Christianity. And the quote goes on to say, and Christianity claims supernatural knowledge and divine revelation, and therefore should not be tolerated. And we have to bear that in mind. Like Christianity, the Bible, the gospel of Jesus Christ, that is the problem. And, that is a real obstacle to unity. They've said it themselves. Alice Bailey talked about that as well. We've got to recognise the divinity of all faiths. It's not about joining a particular church, anything like that. We've got to unite. And similarly, Alice Bailey talked about the Jewish problem. You can find a few quotes on her saying that as well. I don't have them to hand, but she spoke about the Jewish problem and that was something that needed to be resolved as well. And I think, a couple of things. Naturally, that's going to be the case for Christians, just because we are saved and, the enemy wants to attack Christians. And, that's a given. But also the Jews as well. We've seen that historically in the Bible. And, the enemy would attack the Jews primarily because we were promised a Messiah would come from the Jews. So that's one reason they would attack. At the moment, the Messiah has already come. Praise the Lord for it. We thank the Lord for Jesus. At the moment, one of the things that needs to play out is what happens in Israel in the end times. Now, if Satan can destroy the Jews, it's the same kind of thing, but it's for a different purpose, right? So that God wouldn't be able to fulfill all those prophecies that he's promised that Israel would be restored, all Israel would be saved, and that they would have the land. So these are all spiritual things. And it's no accident it's Christianity and the Jews that are picked out. There's no other religions that are mentioned in that.
That's also part of God's plan in certain ways, and that he promises to save the remnant of his people.
Yeah.
So that's why the dragon would pursue the woman, which is a picture of the nation of Israel, and also the believers in Jesus.
Yeah, no, 100%. And, we might just find that in the Bible. It's just simply there. And you made a good point about that being the remnant as well. But all will be saved, right? Look at Zechariah. They will look upon me, whom they have pierced. It's talking primarily about Israel, but, the world's going to see that as well. So, wherever there's God's plan at work, Satan's going to try and go against it. But, I've read the Bible a fair bit now, and I don't see anywhere that Satan ever prevails against the Lord, because that just is not possible. The Lord is God alone. He is victorious. He is almighty. And those things just don't stand. So we just need to stand on the Bible, stand on his truth, stand on his strength, and, reach out to those that are in darkness. They need the gospel.
So, I mean, what happened in the 1930s and 40s could have been like essentially a typology or a parallel of some of these things, it seems, that happened then. And yeah, it's just, I think it's so important to recognize these things. And I know that a lot of listeners have probably come from the truth movement and have listened to some of these folks like David Icke and others that have been kind of pushing these narratives. But we have to remember that these people like David, although we pray for him that he would be saved, but currently what he's pushing is very antichrist doctrines that are Gnostic and theosophical. So we have to question what he's saying and why. I mean, it may be that he doesn't fully know everything, reason why he's doing it. It may be that he's very spiritually deceived. I mean, I don't know all the reasons why, only God knows that, but at face value, we can see what it is. And so I just want to finally go on in this podcast episode, and we'll speak to you again in a podcast soon about some of the other issues to do with this. But Jesuits have a mystical element too. They were founded by Ignatius Loyola. Is there any connection to the Jesuit order in a broader sense they were set up to fight against biblical Christianity, essentially. So is there any links with that order?
For sure. It's one of the biggest findings, obviously being saved, nothing compares to that. But in that whole process, one of the biggest switches was, I guess, always being told in the truth movement that everything was because of the JEWs. And that was just kind of, without really knowing it too much about it, it was just kind of accepted back to all the names thrown about and everything just seems like a case closed and settled. But I was surprised at actually how much the Jesuits have a part to play in this. The power they have, the influence they have, and all bearing in mind the Lord is sovereign. The Lord is not surprised. The Lord is strong, almighty. But in terms of earthliness and deceitfulness, the scale of their influence and power is very widespread. And I think, we even see that with Germany, with the dictator in the 1930s. Was it Himmler? I think it said that he modelled the SS on Jesuitical models. And there's a whole bunch that you can go into there as well in terms of rabbit holes about connections with the Vatican, all that kind of stuff. And I think we're also seeing that playing out now as well in what we're talking about up to date. Now, I'm not going to link and say, this person is a Jesuit or that person isn't a Jesuit, all those kind of things. But the Jesuit is a counter-Reformation movement. It was designed as a military order that have also changed faces over time, where they were more militaristic but are now become more infiltration. And, they've always infiltrated, but more infiltration. And you wouldn't be able to tell one from any other person, free to speak against the Pope, to basically use any means. What's their phrase? The ends justifies the means to basically achieve what they would want. And we've got to bear that in mind that, just now with what is happening, we read in the Bible that there would be a revived Roman Empire, and we can see that the way that they've operated to try and do that, like I said, have changed over time, but are now uniting with other religions, but they previously fought with them as well. So we have to bear that in mind, that, there is that agenda going on to essentially bring world domination as they would see it under the Vatican. And the Jesuit is the main arm of that, to be quite honest with you. So we've got to be very careful of what they're doing. So I would say their influence is huge. It's very substantial, probably more than what people in the truth movement would know, because I think that one thing you notice in the truth movement, I've been still in a lot of secular groups, is Jesuits never get a mention. Hardly ever. And for their proportion, that's so disproportionate for the amount of power and influence they actually have, which is very extensive, very extensive.
Yeah, that's interesting there, because in some way you're mentioning some of the same elements that we've been talking about. This whole militaristic element, the mystical element, the anti-Bible believing Christianity element. And of course, then you have the replacement theology, which then brings in the Israel thing. So, yeah, there's a lot of the same elements there. And so, again, I want to say that not every person who is within a group always fully knows everything that's going on. I mean, you've always got the low-level people that probably don't understand everything that the people at the top do.
For sure.
So that kind of pyramid scheme thing. But yeah, it's very interesting to note, and that's a really good topic, and we're going to speak about in a podcast just coming up in the next couple of weeks. So we'll have you back on for that. And in terms of this, I just want to mention this quote that says, from a Christian leader in the past, he said, "Almost all doctrinal error is really truth perverted, truth wrongly divided, truth disproportionately held and taught." So I think that's a good summary of some of the things we've talked about here, where, you know, there's the lack of nuance, the polarizations, the taking a truth and turning it into the only truth, and this kind of extremism that comes from it. So with what we see going on, I mean, when you think, just to finish, when you think like the Pharisees back in the time of the first century thought that the Messiah would come as a military leader. But that was a truth, because the second coming of Christ will be as the King of Kings, and he will come to defeat the enemies, and he will establish his kingdom from that time. So, but what the error was is that they got the timing wrong, and because of that, they actually missed the true Messiah, because they didn't realize that he would come first as the suffering servant and die on a cross. So, you know, my concern is that people, maybe some with good intentions, kind of join this militarization and rebellion and think that it's their job to bring in the second coming of Christ before he comes. And that's just outright false. And just those truth wrongly divided, disproportionately held and taught, can lead to some serious doctrinal error and consequences. So I think that's a good thing to leave it on from this discussion. And, you know, really appreciate you coming on today, Cameron.
No, thank you for having me, Dave. Really good to speak to you. And again, we just hope that anyone listening out there who's in the truth movement, but they don't have Jesus as their saviour, you would turn to him in repentance and in faith, that you would be saved as well. That you wouldn't walk in darkness, but walk in light, not a false light, but the only light there is in Jesus.
Are you searching for a podcast that discusses the most important issues of our day, all from a Christian perspective? Then add Rise Radio to your podcast playlist. Rise Radio explores topics that are shaping our world: philosophies, social narratives, belief systems, prophecies, strange phenomena, as well as spirituality. No topic is off limits. Rise Radio is about sharing the good news of Jesus Christ across the planet. Listen now on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, Buzzsprout, and wherever you get your podcast. Rise above the noise. Discover the truth. Tune into Rise Radio on your favorite podcast player right now.